everybody. I'm going to do it one more time. Good afternoon, everybody. That's what I want to hear. Yeah. Hi there. We are Marcia, Dawkins, and Dan Smith, as you've heard, from the Center for Creative Leadership, and we are thrilled to be here with you today to discuss our work, Succession Reimagined. But before we do that, we need to say a few thank yous. So first of all, thank you to Executive Platforms, to Shanna and Regina for making everything run so smoothly. Thank you to our amazing AV team. I want to get everybody, Garrett, Ashton, and Adam, and the rest of the team in the back who've been so generous with putting all of this together today. And again, thank you to each of you and our colleagues for the Center of Creative Leadership for being here with us and making this happen. So, where we'd like to start is actually at the beginning. We are here to tell you a story about succession and how we've reimagined it in several different ways. This story is one that's going to be a little more honest and a little less traditional than others you might have heard on the topic, and we're ready to dig in with you right now. So, where did all of this come from? Let me take you to the beginning. About 2 years ago, it's been now, Dan, we started thinking about and researching this topic of succession. We wanted to know where people were and where they'd be going. And then something happened. We came across not a research breakthrough, not even a moment of crisis, but we came across a TikTok. Yes, a TikTok from Fortune featuring Jamie Dimon, in which he forewent his usual rhetoric of AI speech, earnings calls, and the like. In this clip, Jamie Dimon talked about succession as his #1 most important task. And he went so far as to say these words here: we all want to get it exactly right. These 8 words pretty much changed everything for Dan and me, and how we think about what succession is and the urgency with which we must address it. Because if a leader like Jamie Dimon is making this his #1 most important task, the question for us becomes this one: what if we actually do get it right? And so that's what we're here to talk to you about today. What if we get succession right? Now, in order to do that, we have to ask and answer a few key questions. So the first will be, who are we? Who are we here talking about succession? The second will be, what exactly is it that we're talking about when we say succession? And finally, what does it mean to get this exactly right? So to start with our first question, I'll turn it to Dan.
So the first question, of course, is who are we? We're Drs. Marcia Dawkins, Dr. Dan Smith, and we're very grateful to be here today, and we're grateful for your attention. And these are a few things that we'd like to tell everyone new that we meet. First, we're polymaths. Our expertise and experience spans strategic communication, cultural futurism, organizational psychology, program evaluation, and 2 generations. Practically speaking, in our day-to-day, we like to put our heads together and think about what matters, what works for leadership transitions, and why. Second, we love patterns, and we find them everywhere. We find them in bibliometric maps, we find them in song lyrics, we find them in research reports, industry reports, we find them in market trends analyses, we find them in memes and television shows. Third, we believe in open knowledge. At CCL, all of our research, our frameworks, and everything we're going to present today is publicly available to you. Now, if we may say a few things about you. The first, you shape the future. You're here today because you have some level of influence over who's going to lead in your organization next and how ready they're going to be when it's time. Second, you have real needs right now. We've talked to a lot of C-suite folks, people like you, and are identifying some of the pain points related to things like readiness and pipeline, board communication, how to future-proof your skills for leadership for things like AI, fiscal responsibility, and many more. And third, we hope that you too can get it right with the data and information you're going to receive today. So, to sum things up, who is the collective we here? We are all leaders with a responsibility to make sure that leadership gets passed on right. We're from different levels, industries, geographies, demographics, all trying to figure out how to get this exactly right. That's our shared perspective, and this is our starting point, where now we must decide to embrace leadership as not holding on to power, but thinking about how we can pass it on so that it can continue to grow and thrive.
Thanks, Dan. So now that we know who we are, we're going to get to the second question, which is what is it? But in order to do that, we're going to play Name That Tune. I know, name that tune, for real, I'm serious. So, yay! So, I'm going to play a tune for you, and I'd like you to raise your hand as soon as you know what it is. Is everybody ready? Okay. Got 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay. What is it? No. Do I have to go back? Wait a minute. No? Oh, you thought that's what? Okay, I'm going to go back. Hold on. Okay, I got to go way back. Hang on.
We're going to play it again.
I'm going to play it again. Okay. Take 2.
Looking for hands.
Just give everyone else 1 minute. Okay. Succession, exactly.
I heard
Yay!
light bulb moments.
Round of applause. Thank you very much.
Although Eye of the Tiger would have been great too.
Exactly. Eye of the Tiger is no slouch either as a song, we'll say. Absolutely. Right? So when we talk to people about Succession, that's the first thing they always say, did you watch the show? Right?
Yep.
As a matter of fact, we did. Right? So let us tell you a little bit more about what that means and how that relates to the research that we're sharing with you this morning. When people ask us this question and ask us if we watch the show, we realize something important, right? Was that the stories that we hear about over the water cooler, through our screens, in our hallways, are shaping the conversation in some important ways that was in and of itself worthy of some time and attention. So Dan and I did due diligence, and we watched a lot of TV. We watched 50 years worth of Golden Globe Award-nominated and Emmy Award-nominated programming. And what we did was we actually studied the plots. There were 161 of these series that have aired over the past 50 years that feature the topic of succession as a plot. And what we did there was then take the #1 show and say, what does it all mean? And so here, of course, you see Logan Roy and Rupert Murdoch as the main inspirations for this story. But what you notice on the right of your screen is the actual Murdoch family featured in a 2024 New York Times story that explained that the family not only, like all of us, loved the theme song, watched the show, but actually debated it and rewrote their succession strategy and response. And this became a story of life imitating art, imitating life, and imitating art again, when Taylor Swift last year talked about her latest album and the song that became most popular, Father Figure, as also inspired by this story. Also naming certain leadership qualities like mentorship, like sponsorship, like trust and loyalty as key to the stories that we tell and the skills that we need to handle succession responsibly. So here we are, researchers seeing Jamie Dimon in a TikTok, watching Logan Roy on Succession, and listening to Taylor Swift and realizing this is about more than entertainment. This is about cultural R&D.
So next, Marcia and I turn to the data behind the shows, where we think what's going on is actually much more dramatic, because this is what's happening. And it's probably a large part of why people don't want to talk about it, why Succession has become so taboo, because this is the reality. The first, there's over $1 trillion lost in market value annually due to poorly managed or failed succession. 85% of new CEOs are first-timers. Let that sit with you for a moment. That's a signal of the demographic and generational shift occurring among our leaders. 37% of active board members state that they are unprepared to handle a succession event. And that's the 37% who are willing to admit it. Finally, 8% of HR leaders express high confidence in their current organization's succession planning capabilities. All right. So when we take a look at all of this together, we find that succession is not just a compelling leadership story, but it's a very real organizational and economic risk, right? Despite all of our concerted efforts, why is this the result that we are getting, right? It's quite alarming. So this led us down our next step of our research, which is to figure out, why is this happening? So for that, Marcia, can you tell them a little bit about what people miss when they try to understand what's going on behind these numbers?
Absolutely. So one of the things we realized in watching all the TV and doing all this research, right, was that we have certain day-to-day habits that get in the way of us thinking about what we really need to think about when it comes to succession. And so as we're busy putting out the 1,000 fires that we're all putting out on our desks and our screens every day, we may not be paying as close enough attention as we need to things like pipeline, to things like process, to things like conversations about readiness. And these oversights that each of us may make add up over time. And they add up into excessive turnover, loss of intellectual capital, loss of psychological capital, right? And a situation in which we find ourselves with these startling statistics and realities. But there is some good news to this story. Believe it or not, some of it comes from TV. Right? The good news to this story is that we can isolate and identify some of these mental models that are shaping how we think and talk about succession, and how we maybe don't think and don't talk about succession in order to begin reimagining it. Let us show you what that means. So stories teach us about who looks ready. And when we rely on story alone, we often get the same type of results. We like to get this sequel that Dan and I are anticipating coming out later this year, right? The Devil Wears Prada 2. But as good researchers, we're also interested in what happens when we move beyond the story, when we stop relying on story alone. So let's take a look at what that means. The first is that there are 3 beliefs that quietly write our succession stories. The first is, it's a taboo. We don't want to talk about it. It's too political. It's too risky. And the lesson that we learned through that is that silence is safest, and it's certainly safer than development. Second, succession is a top-only governance issue. That means development becomes episodic, right? We're waiting for leaders to arrive, and then surprised when these unicorns that we haven't designed for may not make it where we need them to go. And then thirdly, it's transitory. Succession is a discrete event. When we rely on succession this way, value is lost. And again, that gets back to the statistics that we showed. Intellectual value, psychological value, and certainly financial value are lost. So here's the Devil Wears Prada, right? When we begin to put all of this together and think about how our beliefs around succession have been shaped, we begin to ask, what happens when we move beyond these beliefs? What happens when we move beyond the stories that we've been hearing about for half a century and begin to take a different approach?
So whenever Marcia and I get together for our mostly daily meetings, we start with a recap of the latest headlines and dramas that we're seeing unfold in real time. And this was one of the craziest stories that we saw last year. Right? You're reading this correctly. As far as we know, this is one of the first companies we've seen to replace their CEO with an AI agent. So it was pretty surreal for us to see this, and it gave us pause, tremendous pause, because on one hand, these AI tools offer a lot of help, a lot of assistance. They help us sense patterns more quickly. They help us match people with experiences. They help us personalize learning at scale. But upon further reflection of this, what we've realized is that AI is not able to overcome succession's most difficult and most human challenge. That is, AI cannot transfer lived wisdom. It cannot prepare leaders completely for those moments of complexity, moral judgment, ambiguity, and inevitable human fallout. So, to make sure we're clear, we're not against AI. It absolutely plays a critical piece to the puzzle. But what we realized is that it only plays one part to a much broader picture of what succession really is, which led us to our next step. And that was to think about what is succession more as a broader system, a living system of a network of relationships. So what we did, being good researchers, we reviewed the top 1,000 peer-reviewed articles on the topic of succession, because why not? And what you see here is a static image of a bibliographic coupling network map. Okay, before I put you to sleep, I'll do a quick explanation. Each node in this map represents one peer-reviewed article on the topic. Links connect pairs of documents with similarities in content, and the colored clusters represent different conversations happening among researchers within the field, the broader field of succession. What does this represent? This represents the current comprehensive look at what succession is today. Take a look at this map. What themes of research stand out to you? Or maybe what theme or themes are you focusing on in your succession strategy development efforts? When Marcia and I looked over this map, we've been looking at this for a couple of years now, and we continue to take new things away from it every day. Some of these were expected and consistent with what we're seeing in our cultural and media analyses, such as legacy versus innovation and high-stakes drama, these clusters near the top. But there were some that were surprising to us and refreshing to us, such as cross-border alchemy, where we've got researchers trying to understand how global organizations can navigate power and transition across cultures. And foundations for future success in this blue cluster, where science is asking the questions about how we can develop our talent management and succession systems to make them more future ready. Research in these areas, and there's quite a lot, is looking at succession less as a top-down function and more as developing a organization systematic capability that starts on day one of every leader's journey in the organization. And that's not necessarily something we're going to be watching in our Netflix shows tonight. So some of the best organizations might even be thinking about your own succession systems and how many of these topics you might be covering. That's one place to start. Some of the best global large organizations might even have succession systems that cover all 9 of these areas. But when we think about the future, there still remains a lot of empty space in between and beyond the clusters where problems remain undiscovered and unsolved for. But before we go down any rabbit holes any further with this map, to keep it practical, you might be thinking about, how do I use this? What's my next step? And well, this is a map. This is precisely that. We think this is a guide for you to think about what you want your succession strategies to solve for. Or perhaps it helps you identify blind spots that you might not have seen before. In any case, what this allowed us to do next was think about, okay, if this is all the research going on in succession, we need to now reimagine what the definition of succession looks like. It demands a broader definition. So for that, Marcia, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you. I want to stay on this map actually for a second, because every time I hear Dan talk about it, right, I'm more and more interested in these white spaces between the dots, right? How do we fill this in our organizations? And how do we think about filling in this white space around the clusters that we've seen? And so to do that, we had to access our imagination. And to access our imagination, we had to think about what succession would be like now from this story, to the story about humans and technology, to the story that includes everything we've learned about it from the science, to now, how do we live it? How do we do this? And what does this mean? And so what this means for us is that succession is a carefully crafted journey in leadership development that has at least 4 steps. This is not all the steps, but these are the 4 that make the most sense to begin our conversation with you today. And these steps start with people, right? So how do we elevate leaders to their peaks with training and development, right? This is, again, breaking that taboo of waiting for leaders to arrive and thinking about succession as a top-only governance ritual. The second step also centers around people, where it's asking us to redesign our working relationships to have early and often conversations about readiness. Now, what do we mean when we say that, right? When we're thinking about readiness, we're thinking about where people are right now in the organization. We're thinking about the first line of every succession story, which is an inevitable vacancy. We're thinking about the capabilities that our organizations need to fill those vacancies. And then we're thinking about where people actually want to go. What are they capable of? What is our organization willing and able to do in this moment? The third step is about our context, and that's both our organizational and personal context, as well as the larger world context in which we're all operating. And that's where we talk about transferring lived experience, or lessons of experience, as we call them at CCL, into wisdom transfer, where we can begin this process of showing people how to make decisions every day in a way that matters most. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. And finally, the fourth step on this journey is actually thinking about how we are designing and redesigning our organizations, right? How can we take them from static spreadsheets with benchmarks and org charts into a living, learning system of leadership development? So when we can do all of that, we get to what Dan and I like to call the trillion-dollar question. And that is, how do we do this? How do we get it right? And what is right?
That's ultimately the question. That's why we're all here. And another way to put this is also, what's right for your organization? And over what time horizon? Right? These are now the questions we're faced with as we've done a deep dive on the topic. So to do that, we employ what we've created and call the ICG Succession Planning Framework. Okay. Now, before we jump right into it, I want to offer a note about how to use this. Okay. This is not meant to be a new workflow or system tacked on to the side of your existing operations and workflows. Rather, it is our intention, and the way this is designed, is to function as something that your existing operations and workflows can work through to effectively reimagine succession for your organization. So keep that in mind as we dive in. Okay? This model spans, it has 3 elements to it that span 3 different time horizons, that investigate 3 different levels of strategic depth, and that explore 3 unique leadership challenges. Okay, let's look at each one. The first is immediacy, the I in the ICG. Immediacy is about your ability to get it right now. Because we all face those decisions related to succession when things happen in the moment. Immediacy is about getting it right now, making that right decision when events occur. Second is continuity, the C in the ICG. Continuity is about identifying the stories, the habits, the patterns, the lifeblood of your organization that needs to be preserved and continued through transitions and used as a foundation with which you can continue to build on. And the third is generativity, the G in the ICG. Generativity is the hardest but most rewarding aspect of succession when you can create the time and space for it. And it's where Marcia and I get most excited, because this is where we get to ask questions such as, how are we preparing and building leaders for future environments that we haven't even entered yet? Generativity thinking is the type of thinking that helps pull your organization toward its next 10, 20, or even 100 plus years, as some of our clients are trying to do with us. Pretty cool. So, taking a step back though, what we've also recognized through this process is that there's no one-size-fits-all succession solution. As such, this framework's not going to just give you the answers to your questions today. But why we think this is such a powerful tool is that it's going to guide you to ask better questions to begin with. And that will lead you down your own journey to identifying and creating your leadership story and system that's capable of thriving for years.
So no matter what we say or how excited we get about leading into the future, 1, 2, 5, 10, or even 100 years from now, as some of our clients are asking, we always have someone in the audience who says, okay, Marsh, okay, Dan, but what do I do? How do I take this home? And how do I enact this with my team and my organization tomorrow? So if that person is here, we just want you to know we see you, we appreciate you, and we have designed this moment for you. Let's start with the first thing that you can do regarding immediacy. Step one of addressing immediacy is to take what we call a succession audit. And that means you identify one area or one role where an unexpected transition would cause significant disruption. Now, one of the other startling statistics we have in our arsenal that we didn't share earlier was that up to 15% of all leadership transitions are unexpected. Okay? So first, we identify this role. Then we have honest evaluations about readiness for this role. Third, we identify one action that we can take, and then we actually take that action. So that's our first step toward addressing immediacy. The second is the C, or continuity. And here's where we talk more about development relationships. Right? So here's where we begin to identify both what keeps the light on, what keeps us stable, but also risks like over-reliance on specific individuals, talent choke points, missing relationships, missing pieces to that larger map about the context that we showed you a few minutes ago. And how we begin to address this is that we have conversations about readiness starting on day one. And remember, those conversations are about our people. They're about the contexts and the complexity of those contexts that we are all living through. And then they are also about how we are designing and redesigning our organizations. Finally, the G. This is where Dan and I stay excited, and this is where we ask you to imagine yourself in your happy place with your imagination cap on, all the feathers off, and say, what would a smooth succession process actually look like for my organization, for my role, for my leader's role, for the people that I support? Then comes the fun part. Describe this role. How does it feel for that new person on the first day? How does it feel for those who are exiting? And then finally, we can come to pen and paper or to ones and zeros and plan accordingly. So these are the first steps that you can begin to take along this journey. Now, as we have enacted this with our clients, one of the surprising elements that has come out has been something that is both underestimated and underutilized. And it's something we've mentioned a few times in this presentation so far that we're going to spend a couple of minutes with you on right now. And that is what we've come to call wisdom transfer. Dan, will you share a little more about that?
Of course. So in our conversations with leaders and our examination of existing succession systems out there, what we find is that most tend to be built around and focused on what we call knowledge transfer. What we find is that the most effective succession systems are also built to transfer essential wisdom. And our ICG model helps us get there. Okay? Let's elaborate a little bit. So most organizations start with knowledge transfer. Right? This is our comfort zone. Okay? This is knowledge transfer is something that occurs through some of the things you see here on the left. Right? Our playbooks, our models. Knowledge transfer relies on the mountain of data that we're all sitting upon to develop training programs, simulations. Knowledge transfer represents the nuts and bolts of succession, right? It's sort of the hardware, if you will, the really tangible stuff. And because of that, it's absolutely essential. But leadership wisdom is required when the playbook runs out. Right? Leadership wisdom is where true competency resides. Leadership wisdom is the ability to know what mattered in the moment and why, and to be able to do that repeatedly. Okay? Some of the things here on the right are some of the ways in which that wisdom transfer, just some of the ways in which it can occur. Right? For example, Emotional intelligence and self-regulation are some of these things that we all hear about, but they are very much required on the part of a departing leader, as well as your emerging successors, for long periods of time. And oftentimes, wisdom transfer occurs in the context through various forms of communication, such as storytelling. Some of we're seeing that throughout the conference this week. Oftentimes, though, in the context of developmental relationships, where leaders will say things like, "Come with me so I can show you how this really works." So this is just a sample of our work, but we hope that with our stories, our research, our frameworks, and perhaps another conversation, that you feel both empowered to unlock knowledge transfer and wisdom transfer through your succession planning, because when you do, we all stand to benefit.
So we just want to reiterate the invitation that we've made with you all today, which is to look around at your people, at your context, and at your organization, and take a moment to reimagine what is right for the future together. And in order to help you do that, we just wanted to say that we have just scratched the surface. We've given you just a highlight reel of what we've done at the Center for Creative Leadership on this topic. So what we've shared with you is from 4 rigorously researched reports comprising over 125 pages of work on the past, the present, and what we believe will be the future of succession. So please scan the code, come see us at booth 20, and let's have some more conversations about how we can get this exactly right. Thank you very much.
All right, folks, we're going to head into breakouts, or actually your networking opportunities outside, so you can get a break, and then we'll be back here.